The rise of GLP-1 medications has changed the conversation around weight, health, and body image. Today on Mastering Change, Charlotte Ord explores the growing conversation about GLP-1 medications, body image, and eating disorder recovery, and why this moment risks pulling us back towards diet culture and weight stigma. She shares why suppressing appetite does not necessarily heal the underlying relationship with the body, and why true health must include nourishment, body trust, psychological safety, and movement, not just changes in appearance. Here's our conversation with Charlotte Ord.
Charlotte, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the podcast today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Do you want to just, if you wouldn't mind now, Charlotte, just saying, introducing yourself in your own words?
Sure. So I'm Charlotte Ord. I'm a counselling psychologist. I come from a background in fitness and strength and conditioning, and I now specialise in body image and eating disorder recovery. And I work in private practice, but have formerly worked in the NHS as well, mainly in bariatric and weight management services.
Wow, what an interesting time to be in that field. I'm fascinated by where this conversation is going to go today, because I feel we're at a bit of a kind of tipping point in that whole space. Obviously, the rise of GLP-1s has had a seismic impact, on that kind of broad areas of knowledge and expertise that you're speaking from. So where shall we start?
I think that's a really good place to start, just naming the complexity of this space at the moment. There has been such a big progression, I think, in terms of body acceptance, in terms of body positivity, health at every size, the kind of recognition that a healthy weight can fall anywhere on the scale of thin to fat, depending on you as an individual, your genetics, and so on. But this recent wave of GLP-1 availability has, I think, led to a huge regression back into diet culture, back into weight stigma, discrimination. And now is this seemingly readily available means of controlling one's weight. And I think for people that have historically struggled a lot with their relationship with their bodies, that has really muddied the waters and left them with a really difficult dilemma about, is this the right thing for me? Is it, what impact is it going to have on me now? What impact is it going to have on me in the future? How much do we actually know about that? And so it's raised, I think, a lot of questions for a lot of people, and I think led to some backward steps, unfortunately, in terms of our, as a society, body acceptance.
I think my main concern with it is kind of touted as the silver bullet, but we know there is no such thing. Any of the work that we do, it's never one thing. It's always lots of things. It's a yes and. Yeah, so talk to me, how are you seeing that? What do you think, if we think about what do you wish people knew or understood or were advocating for? What is it that you're wanting, the message that you're wanting to democratise?
So I think it's important to recognise that these medications, as with most medications, have a place and they can be life-changing for certain people, certain demographics. The problem as I see it, and certainly in my clinics as a specialist in disordered eating, is that I'm seeing clients who don't actually have a medical need for these medications, who are taking them because they have been told that their weight is a problem, even though biologically, in terms of their fitness, their metabolic biomarkers and so on, they are healthy, but because their weight is higher than they feel comfortable, often because of so much social conditioning, media messaging, and so on, they feel like it's the only thing that they can do to feel better, to safeguard their health, is to take these medications. In reality, what I see is them moving further and further down a disordered eating route. Like, if they were to present with that behaviour in an eating disorder clinic, they would meet the criteria for diagnosis. And that to me is of great concern, because that is not health, that is the pursuit of thinness. And that, I think, is where there's a massive problem with our very kind of weight-centric medical model, because there's this sense of, if you are a certain weight, then you're not healthy. It's very pathologizing of weight, even if actually in terms of your metabolic markers and your biomarkers, you're actually in good condition, and and your quality of life is good and so on. So yeah, that's where I see it becoming really problematic.
I also see it as a problem because, again, as you say, as you started this conversation, it's extremely complex, because I see, there are benefits or we see that they are starting to do research in the kind of mental health space, in the addiction space, for kind of how it's helping people with certain addictions, like alcohol addiction, for example, or certain mental health disorders. It can be seeming to be helpful. That said, I think because it's viewed as a silver bullet, and I think it is in a way a silver bullet if the goal is to stop eating or to reduce what you're eating, then reduce the amount you're eating, it is a silver bullet for that. However, for anyone who has disordered eating or any kind of mental problem around food in general, or just mental issues, full stop, the path to well-being, as we know, is not just not eating, it is, or eating less, it is movement, it is what kind of food we put on our plates, the nutritional value of the food that we put on our plates. And I think what we're seeing, certainly what Emma and I have been commenting that we've been seeing on social media, for example, is people who are using these medications and then saying, oh, I only need to have half a McDonald's today and then I'm full. Well, I mean, if you're eating half a McDonald's and not moving and all the rest of it, then but still losing weight and thinking that that's you're achieving your goals, there are so many other issues around that from a mental well-being perspective.
Yeah,
and we're just going to have a whole other problem in 5 to 10 years that's based on health. I mean, I do like this is not. I'm very interested and intrigued by what these new medications can offer, especially. There's initial discussions and research around their ability to reduce your inflammatory markers, which again is which explains why mood disorder and addiction it has this ability to do things. But there are also things in our environment that we can influence that also reduce that. So it's kind of the yes and what are the kind of tenets of health that we need to go back to that go beyond our physical appearance being that, like you talked about, there are people presenting. And I can speak about this from a personal perspective as well as the kind of academic or the theoretical perspective. So many pieces of work that you have to have it. Even if your weight was just a byproduct of your genetics and that the GLP-1 can work with you to reduce your appetite, there's still the relationships with food, the consequence of having been overweight in terms of how you're perceived by others that have to be addressed. You can't just look at one factor, which is the visual, how you presented visually to someone. There's so many other things that underlie health, physical and mental.
Yeah, there's so much complexity here. And one of my concerns is the lack of really rigorous assessment in the prescribing of these meds. As you say, they do, they are showing real promise in a variety of arenas, but we also know that a huge percentage, a majority of the population have poor body image. And we know that body image is a prerequisite for, or certainly a high risk factor for disordered eating. So the likelihood is that the majority of people that are seeking these meds for weight management, and I use that in inverted commas, may well have a risk factor for disordered eating, but it's not really being screened for appropriately, and it's certainly not being overseen on an ongoing basis, which, so that's on the individual level, you have a problem. And then on a more systemic, broader, perhaps generational level, what is being modelled to future generations in terms of a healthy relationship with food? Now, for me, kids seeing their parents belly eating, injecting themselves, it does not demonstrate a healthy relationship with body and food. That's a massive red flag. And so I think all of these factors, biological, social, psychological, all has to be taken into consideration, including what happens when either you can no longer afford to continue on the injections, or you've lost so much muscle mass or have such low energy, which is what I'm seeing showing up time and time again in my clinic, that you don't want to continue because you recognize actually it's not good for your health. And then your weight shoots back up, as is normally the case when someone's been on, dramatically calorie restricted diet or intervention. Then what happens psychologically, metabolically, or, that's a car crash waiting to happen. And so all these factors, I think, had to be taken into consideration. But at the moment, I don't see that happening. I see the rapid prescription and then kind of let's just see what happens and mop up afterwards. And it's a real worry.
Fascinating what you say. I mean, I think I fit into that description of someone. I'm sort of 10 plus years in addiction recovery, but also more years in eating disorder recovery. But I don't know that eating disorder recovery you're never recovered. Whereas I feel recovered from drug addiction, like really do. Whereas I think eating disorder, it's always there. There's always a little bit of food noise. It's always because we have to eat every day, right? So it's always a thing. Now I feel like I love food and I'm able to really enjoy the kind of social aspects of food nowadays, that I'm really grateful for. That said, there's this element of kind of peer pressure in a way. So, well, if everyone else is taking it, and I could just do it for a little bit of time, and there's all that, and I know that I could do it without being kind of, as you say, assessed properly. I also know there's people with the rise of AI now using Grok or other AI to modify what they look. So, because I think you have to send a photo in.
Yeah.
So you send a photo and like enlarge yourself so that then you get prescribed, and I think that and there's definitely I don't think there's any assessment of is this a modified photo or not. And then they're still being prescribed this stuff. So I think it's, yeah, fascinating and scary. And, I guess it's just a case of watch this space,
Yeah, you
Um,
raised such a good point there in terms of when someone is in recovery from an eating disorder, going on something that just removes the issue is, yes, of course, in that moment or in that short sort of period of time, it's a relief, but it does nothing to actually repair the wounding. It does nothing to teach them regulation skills or grounding or resilience or flexibility, all those things that we know are so crucial for healing. And so it is a bit of a sticking plaster. And so there's that issue, and then there's the issue which you just raised, which is I know personally friends who are on GLP-1s who have absolutely no place being on them medically or in terms of their BMI, but it's so easily available because you can just if you've got friends that can prescribe or access it, or you just submit a photo. And I'm noticing myself feeling like, oh, I don't want to give that information away, but I think, to be honest, it's so wide
everyone
out.
knows it, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm also really like what you said, you just mentioned about the whole children kind of aspect and what they're learning from us. And for me, it's a really, I had an eating disorder, or had very much disordered eating throughout my childhood from the kind of when I hit sort of teenage times. And I've got a son now who is coming into his teenage years, and he's extremely sporty and he loves sport, and I'm fortunate that he's in a really active school. He's just won a scholarship to another school, a sports scholarship to his school after his prep school, but he plays a lot of rugby, but he's not small. Like he's not, well, he's small in stature at the moment because he's not grown yet, but he's not, the other kids in his class are very skinny, and he is starting to kind of notice, I think, that the difference. And I think for me, like I've had him in tears before, and I don't know what to really do or say about it. And I think I'd love to kind of pick your brains around that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think first of all, it's important to recognize that body image isn't just about how we look or what we see when we look in the mirror. It's influenced by a number of factors like our security, our sense of belonging, our feeling of competence or value in other realms of our being as well. But one of the things that I always encourage, and I've written a book called Body Confident You, Body Confident Kid, which talks a lot about this. One of the things I often encourage parents, coaches, anyone that's working with young people to remember is that the more representation of different body types of diversity that we, as both adults and children, are exposed to, the more likely it is that our idealized image, that is the image that we would most like to see ourselves as, is going to be reflected in a positive way. And that's why, widespread kind of media representation in a positive way is so important, because if we only see very thin or narrow ideals, then we end up with normative delusion, which is this idea that everyone is skinny and beautiful, or everyone is muscular and ripped. And of course, that's not reality. But if that's what we're exposed to constantly, and our self-image doesn't match that, then our self-esteem is likely to drop. So if kids are exposed, for example, to a wide array of body shapes and sizes and people doing what they enjoy, being celebrated, then the likelihood is that they're like to go, oh, cool, that looks like me. And also remembering as parents that your kid's very likely to have a similar body shape to you as when they get older. And if all they hear is you berating your body and saying how awful it is or how much you want to lose weight or this constant pursuit of thinness, then the likelihood is that they're going to internalize that message. And so I think that's not to criticize, or, we've all grown up in this really sort of insidious, toxic diet culture narrative. So it's understandable that that's, what the messaging that we've kind of internalized for ourselves. But I think the more conscious you can be about the way that you speak about your body, not just for your kids but for you as well, the better.
I think that's really good advice. And I think and really hard, and it begins at home, doesn't it? I know that, and I've got to really make sure that because that's not what I saw growing up. As you kind of mentioned, my mum was always battling against her body and her weight, and Weight Watchers this or that or whatever it was, constantly on different diets. And I have really known that that was a thing for me growing up, and I really tried to do the opposite for Rory, but it's still, as I said, it's an eating disorder never really goes, and it's hard when he's at a school. There's only 8 boys in his class, it's not like, and they're all of those 8 boys are skinny, just skinny kids, and so that is what he sees. And I don't know what other media he's really watching other than rugby games, which they're all relatively fit, I imagine, that he's watching. So yeah.
Another thing I think is really helpful is to shift the focus from what your body looks like to what your body can do. It sounds like Rory is a phenomenal young athlete. He's doing really well, he's got scholarship. Like, how amazing is that? And the more you can kind of celebrate what bodies can do as opposed to what they look like, from sort of celebrating difference, the better, because it then, you're increasing the value of your body and encouraging. It's very hard to really appreciate something and actually hate it at the same time. So even if it's just as a neutralizing effect, it helps us to see our bodies, from through a broader lens.
I think that's so important about what your bodies can do and modeling that. So modeling like a healthy relationship, exercise, movement, the tenets of health, as opposed to just being focused around the conversation with food. And like you, I think that this moment in time where we've got back to this idea that your weight is a reflection of your well-being or your health, or this idealized thing. It's unfortunately did what happened in my childhood in the 80s, which is kind of put it right in front of everyone's, even if it isn't at home, it's there in social media, it's there visible, and people around you are sort of shrinking. Because when I was a kid, it was all about, oh, fat's bad, so everything the fat was taken out, sugar was put in, the over processing of food. The consequence of that for anyone with a genetic predisposition and insulin resistance, and what that actually did is, for me, as far as I'm concerned, was the catalyst to the epidemic here. I think this is different but the same in many ways, is sort of focus, and regardless of how much you do at home. I mean, I as a child that was obese and had my own journey through this, I was determined when I had children I was going to model a healthy relationship with food, but not just about food, like how I'm, take care of my physicality. And you say about it's what your body can do. I think I really only had a positive relationship with my body after I birthed my first child, my daughter, because I was like, look what it can do. Yeah, how can you hate on something that can do something so incredible? So that focus on those. Yeah, I'd be interested. Do you have what are the principles that so we've talked about a few things. Are there other things that we've not mentioned that you see as key to building that healthy relationships with our bodies?
Well, I think first of all, it's important to understand what body image actually is. I think a lot of people think of body image as, this is what I see and this is what I think about that. But it's more than that. It's not just what we see and what we think. It's also how we feel and also how we behave towards our bodies. And what you were just saying is really key. I think if you can practice self-care, body respect, it starts to build a habit of treating your body as the amazing entity that it is, that this precious entity. We only have one of them. And so that's an important component, being mindful of the environment that you're in, curating that as much as possible, both on and offline, giving yourself permission to hold boundaries around the conversations that you're in. At the moment, especially, weight is such a hot topic. I know I have a particular bias for it because it's my passion, it's my work, and like you, I'd suffered for many years with an eating disorder, so I have a kind of keen ear for it. But if you're able to just give yourself permission to step out of conversations that feel like they're reiterating a harmful narrative for you, and find spaces that do feel safe and encouraging of body acceptance, of nurturance, all of those things. And I think that can just help to buffer some of that noise that's out there. I also think it's really important, especially as clinicians, to be very critically aware around some of these narratives that are becoming kind of popularized, like food noise. To me, food noise is food preoccupation. And we know that food preoccupation is very often an outcome of food restriction, whether induced by medication or not. So it makes absolute sense to me that if people are trying to lose weight, cutting out food groups, reducing their calories, they're going to be ruminating constantly around food, because that's our brain's natural drive to not starve to death. It's actually a quite a healthy function. And what we see time and time again in eating disorder recovery is that when you take restriction out and start to tune back into the body's natural intuition and wisdom for what it needs, and really re-establish body trust, food noise comes down. And I see that. Oh, I've experienced that myself. I see it time and time again. But that feels really scary for lots of people. And now that there's this sense of, oh, food noise is awful and has been kind of pathologized itself rather than as a symptom of a behaviour, we've got an issue because focus has shifted onto something different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does. And I don't think that term food noise was, I don't think it existed 5 years ago, did it?
It didn't. But it was, we talked about food preoccupation all the time.
Well, and I think this is really clever marketing these drugs. There's two things I see. One, this term food noise, which has been like harnessed. The second is the line about not shaming people that are on it. It's almost like you can't have a discussion about it because that's the, I'm even nervous coming into this conversation because I am approaching this in a very balanced way. I'm so tempted, as somebody who's constantly been challenged by their weight, I'm so tempted on so many occasions to think, should I try this to get rid of that last 2 stone, the last 2 stones, if I'm in the right part of the bracket of the, so I'm by no means against them. I can see there's huge potential with these drugs, and there's 2 things that have really driven them forward: this concept of food noise and this idea that if you say anything negative, and this almost like there's a proud, like it's a badge that I'm wearing with pride now, there's no hiding it. It's like I'm going to be really unapologetic.
I think people are still hiding it. I don't know,
but there's a shift, because I went for dinner and I have recently shifted what I'm eating around. I'm in perimenopause, and I went for dinner with an old friend, and they're like, "Are you on the jabs?" I was like, it is this kind of like, if
you can't lose weight, you can't lose weight naturally now without people being like, oh yeah, she's definitely been on, or she or he or whoever has been using the jabs. I also think it's crazy that, I look at the supermarkets and they say now, oh, we're packaging food differently. We now get, like, Waitrose has got small steaks for people who are, and I'm just like, how? Our whole, if everything's changing in that, to that level, is scary, I think.
It's astronomical. It really is. And I think you raised such a good point, because this isn't about shaming individuals, whether they choose to take it or not. I have so much compassion for anyone who, regardless of your body size, has struggled with your relationship with your body. It's an absolute travesty, I think, to be put at war with your body. It's the only one you'll ever have. And that's not the individual's fault. Like, we've all grown up in this really toxic environment in which people have, or the industries have profited off our shame, and it's still happening now in the biggest way ever. So the fact that people are getting caught up in that and want to move out of this very stigmatized group and feel safe is just basic human nature. Of course you want to feel safe and you want to feel accepted and like you belong. We all want that. It's just a case of it, is this long term going to actually give us what we want, what we need? Or is it just perpetuating the problem even further?
It's in, or creating even new problems,
right?
Because that point around half a glass of Chardonnay and I'm done for today is like, but what about nutrient density? What about the kind of and I think it's harder to get your head around how your body changes and what you need. But it is important if you want optimum health and not just an optimum physical appearance.
And even more concerningly, we have no idea really what adjusting the GLP-1 pathways are going to do to other hormonal pathways, and what impact that's going to have on people's DNA, their children and future generations. We don't know what impact that's going to have in terms of their risk, their disease, their weight, and we know nothing about that. And so it's not just about us as individuals, it's also about future generations, both in terms of the social impact, but also the genetic impact too.
Surely they've tested all that though before they give it out to the public. Surely they've tested some of it. Something.
There is quite. I mean, this has been used in the context of diabetes for a long time. So there is some. I mean, around safety and efficacy, I think there is some solid data, but we haven't had intergenerational. I don't think. That's the point, isn't it? What is it doing? You can't disrupt one. I mean, it's just. Caveat, not medics, but any kind of disruption to a GLP-1 agitator that's moving the needle 100,000 times fold what is naturally occurring in the body. The cause and effect says there must
Yeah.
be a payoff at some point. But
what for me is so upsetting, I think, about this is that there are ways. I'm not talking about people that are taking these meds for diabetes and for other kind of medical conditions. But when people are taking them to improve their mental health because it's been impacted by body image or by weight, then I think it's a real shame that we have methods of improving that, psychological methods that are so effective that aren't necessarily mainstream yet, that are just not being talked about, not being given the kind of exposure, and so the actual issue never really gets addressed. It just gets kind of sort of skated over by stopping people from eating, basically. So you're basically inducing an eating disorder in order to alleviate that psychological distress. And again, that's not shaming or blaming anybody that chooses that, because that relief can feel enormous, but it doesn't actually address the original wounding or the original issue.
Ultimately, the best situation would be if these GLP-1s have been tested and are safe transgenerationally and ongoing, and we had all that data. I don't know if we do or we don't, but if we have all that and they can say, yes, okay, you will be fine, take this for the rest of your life and you will be fine physically, mentally, etc. That's one thing, but it still doesn't, as you mentioned, solve the problem, the ultimate solution. And like everything, because it's a pharmaceutical medical model that can make money fast, that's the only thing they focus on. However, I think the best solution would be if you could combine the GLP-1s with all the knowledge that we have kind of in the trauma world or in the mental health space, and say, you can take these. Of course, you can take these if you want to feel safe, fit in, all the rest of the stuff that we want as humans. But you, at the same time, you absolutely have to know what good nutrition is, that you need to move your body, there are all these other interventions to make you feel well and healthy.
But there's a problem,
Yeah.
because in my experience of working with several people that are taking GLP-1s, they're eating so little that they can't exercise. And so they can't possibly establish a healthy relationship with food because they just can't eat. And so actually it sort of stalls that recovery process in a way. There's no body trust there. There's no reattunement to one's own internal cues for hunger and satiety. There's no kind of relearning, because the natural drive to eat and to stop has gone. And so it sort of takes the problem away temporarily. But
And then what happens when you reach, I mean, because hopefully, but then again, if they're not people with eating disorders or disordered eating or distorted body image, they get to a certain weight that they're very happy with, and they stop. That's the goal, right? That's the ideal persona, right? Is they get to a certain weight because they were taking this because they were overweight by a small amount, let's say. They get to a certain weight and then they stop. And then, as you say, like every other very crazy diet, you suddenly just put all the weight back on, which is damaging for your organs, damaging for your mental health, damaging, etc., etc. So that's almost my bigger worry around people who are healthy enough taking it, not but taking it to get extremely anorexic, because how do you stop?
well, I mean, there's something there. One is around how many people taking these for weight management don't have body image or eating issues. Probably a very small amount. And then this term overweight, I think, is so problematic, because over what weight? Over a BMI, that we know, that model is so flawed anyway. Someone can be overweight and be completely healthy, just like someone can be, in the healthy category and have a myriad of health complications. We can't possibly tell whether someone is healthy based on their BMI or their weight. So then we're looking at, okay, well, society has told me that this weight isn't okay for me, even though actually all my markers tell me it's fine. So I'm going to then try and control that. And, so it's really complicated.
Yeah, it is. And I think a healthy
and I
weight
think
is when you are able to look at yourself in the mirror, fluctuating between various weights, and say, I feel good, I feel healthy, I feel like I'm waking up in the morning, I've got energy, I can move, I can do everything I want to in this body that I've got without pain, without, kind of being tired or any of that stuff. I think that's when for me anyway, that's when I'm at a healthy weight. I know when I put on I've been a lot heavier than I am now, and I've been a lot lighter than I am now. And I know that when I am heavier, for example, skiing puts a lot of weight on my like joints and stuff. So I know I'd actually prefer not to be this weight. I prefer to be slightly lighter so that I can enjoy those kind of physical activities
Yeah.
in a way that's easy for my body. Being a lot lighter, just not, I was just unwell at that point. So,
Yeah.
you know.
And I think what's also important to recognise is there's actually no proven safe, sustainable way of losing weight. And this is what we've been told by the kind of healthcare system, that weight should be under our control. But of course, 95% of people that go on diets will lose weight and then regain it all. So that's kind of been proven time and time again not to work. And so we get into this trap of feeling like, okay, well, I need to lower my weight, rather than, okay, what can I do to get myself fitter, stronger, more flexible, better cardiovascular conditioning, all those things that are going to help me sustain health in all the ways and do all the things that I want to do. That's not really narrative, because there's no profit in that, really.
Well, and that's metabolic fitness, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like you're talking then about a different benchmark where you've got a body that is like a well-oiled machine, as opposed to just the weight. I mean, and this is the thing with weight, it's such a variable thing. And these old height weight charts don't help. The whole BMI thing is very one-dimensional. It's these, I think
I have a question about that because again, I'm always worried. Like Emma and I talk about this a lot, but I'm always I'm very aware that I had disordered eating, etc. And so anytime, like I don't really like these health apps or health, Aura rings or Apple Watch, all of that stuff because I think it's just selling me anxiety. It's telling me I know when I wake up in the morning. If I'm tired because I drank a few too many glasses of wine last night, or I know what I'm doing when I'm intuitively very in tune with my body. I know when I'm looking after it, and I know when I'm not, and I know when I'm etc. So I don't love those things. But I recently bought a scale again, and scales are a thing that I don't love. But I recently bought a scale that is doesn't it does measure your weight if you want it to, but it has what it measures is like your body fat, your muscle mass, your metabolic age, your metabolic like how all of this stuff. So it gives me loads of different readings that don't really like the weight is. It says if you want to know your weight, you can, but we don't. And if you want to know your BMI, you can, but we don't recommend. This is the stuff that, and I'm like amazed because it's like, oh my body fat is really low. Everything is really good. Like it feels like I feel like it's a very much more for me a much healthier scale to stand on than a one that just tells me a weight or a BMI or something.
Yeah, absolutely. I share that sentiment. I feel like this kind of externalization of our health and sort of relinquishing of almost sort of responsibility or trust, at least, to this external device is a real shame, actually, because our bodies have so much wisdom. I think most people can wake up in the morning and say, yeah, I slept well or I didn't sleep well. Whereas, I see people, including my partner, scrolling and, and analyzing all this data. And, oh, there's
I love it.
and
Yeah.
it's, if you can use it in a light touch, then, it's interesting, isn't it? But I see it creating anxiety too. And actually, one thing that we know is not good for sleep is anxiety. And but it does sound like you have a different relationship perhaps with those metrics to weight. And if that feels helpful, I think it's such an individual thing. Like I would say, don't do this or don't do that. But how does it make you feel? Does it encourage you to take care of your body, to have body respect, to feel more accepting of your body? Great. Or is it making you paranoid and fixated and obsessive and compulsive? Then maybe that's something to back off. And that,
Yeah.
that's not going to be a one size fits all.
Yeah.
Well,
No, I
no,
don't.
that's the point. It's never a one size fits all. Because for me, it's like gamified movement and
Yes.
gamified, like I was always, I quite enjoy it when I'm cooking food at the end of the day or having a glass of wine. And it's really sort of demonstrated, and it wasn't significant enough a shift in my kind of intuition and feeling into maybe that actually, having some data, I found it interesting. I found like I've had a bit.
That point for you, Emma, I've really noticed when Emma and I have been working together for maybe 3 years, maybe a bit more now. And I remember when we first met, and for probably 18 months first, like Emma would not, I'm not saying, I wouldn't say that you drink all the time, but Emma would say, I enjoy it one glass of wine. She's very, very controlled about it, like it was I get the end of the day and I love a glass of wine, maybe not every day, but I would say, I remember having these conversations, she's saying, well, I find if I have a glass of wine at the end of a day, if I often know that I know that it impacts my sleep. So for me, it was always a conscious decision. I'll have a glass of wine, and I know that tomorrow my sleep, I'm not going to be on absolutely on form as I would be if I didn't have that glass of wine. So that I made that choice, and that was a choice that I took. Whereas for you, Emma, you didn't have that difference in not being as on your best after a glass of wine, one glass of wine at the end of the day. But only now, since you've been using that ring, have you really said, actually, I can see the data that my sleep is not as good as it would be if I didn't have that glass of wine. So you have really reduced having that glass of wine every day. So I think from that perspective, that's probably good. Great.
And that's the point, is this, like, we all choose the tools that serve us. It's having the ability to understand the intrinsic motivation behind data or tools that are available to us. And unfortunately, there's so many vies for our attention. And when you overlay that with the kind of social norms and expectations of us, rather than the intrinsic feeling of how well I am, how comfortable I am, how easy am I in my own body, how, it is that distraction, I think, and that's the bit that I think you're advocating for, is, you said there's all these other tools available to us from this space. How do we make those things that are not as marketable and commercial, but how do we make that toolkit available to people so they can feel their way through which parts of this? And it's always Mint was talking about that when we first met 4 or so years ago. Since then, I'm well into perimenopause and things shift. Again, your toolkit's never a rigid one either. What I was using in my 20s, how I approached my health and my everything, it's very different to how I approach it now. And I think it's that there is no one and done. And yes, I think what we haven't said on this in this conversation is carrying a lot of weight is very detrimental to mental health, to physical health. It is a clear marker for so much suffering in that moment and in the future. So again, not advocating for suggesting that you just embrace and accept that, but
there has to be some discernment, of course, but we also have to recognise that a lot of people get to very extreme heights of weight because they've been exposed to stigma, to discrimination, to health inequalities, and haven't had the support necessary to find other coping mechanisms besides eating often, or they've got metabolic issues that have contributed to their weight. So, but nevertheless, whatever size body you're in, it is possible to improve your health without pursuing weight loss. That might be a side effect of those, lifestyle changes or whatever. But that's, I think, just wanted to kind of point that out. And
that's right. And I think that point around pursuing health, and it takes us into another kind of, for me, what's becoming more and more gender-rising is the biohacking. So there's this like integrative medicine versus hacking, and biohacking is becoming again perceived of something that's in conflict to this
anti-aging rhetoric.
Yeah,
which is so isn't it? It's
who wants to live? I mean, who wants to live forever? I'm, get to 70 and I'll press the button and I'm done. I'm out here. I do not want to keep
70's
going.
still young. I want to live.
I just know. I'm like, I'm totally like, I do not want to live forever. So that's why I'm like, I don't want to know what's going to keep me alive for longer.
Just on the data aspect, I think one thing that gets really overlooked when we become sort of focused on these data metrics is what we're really seeking in the pursuit of weight loss. Now, of course, that's going to be different, slightly different for everyone. But like we mentioned earlier, a lot of it is about longevity, but also about social safety, about acceptance, about belonging, those, key aspects of psychological health. And for a lot of people, I think, that have struggled with their body image and with disordered eating, it comes down to a nourishment barrier, just this inability to take in emotional and physical nourishment. And that's a result of sometimes of trauma, of social conditioning, of the messages that we receive. And no data is going to fix that. No diet is going to fix that either, actually, perhaps temporarily for a short period of time, but it doesn't actually address that. And I think that's really important to understand, that these metrics can have a place, but if you feel deeply unfulfilled in your relationship with yourself, or you find it very difficult to have a real sense of being loved and lovable, then the likelihood is your work is not in finding the next gadget, it's in repairing that. And that's usually through, not just through
So
talks, but through experiential methods that actually allow you to feel that in a different way. Because in my experience, and this includes myself, people with disordered eating and eating disorders intellectually understand exactly why they've struggled the way they have, how it's maintained. They know all the theory, and actually that can create a defense or certainly a high frustration, because like I know what I should be doing, I know why I'm behaving this way, but I just can't feel differently enough to be able to elicit change. And that's where methods like psychodrama are really effective, because it goes beyond just talking about it to actually, corrective experiences.
Feeling the lived experience, I like feeling
Exactly.
those lived experiences, changing those neural pathways. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I mean, you say something, Minta, don't you? Say like when I've lost weight, it's like it doesn't solve all the problems. It's just me smaller. I
Yeah,
think the
yeah.
expectation is sometimes people, you're going to shed this weight and you're going to feel like
Be totally
um,
different. It's like
But
the
that's
same.
whatever.
that's the message that's been
Yeah.
sold, isn't it? For years and years. Like, just be thin and then you're going to be fine.
It's like, yeah,
Mhm.
it's the same with anything though. It's like, oh, just get rich and then you'll be fine, or just be
Right.
thin and you'll be fine, or just move to a different country and all your problems will just
Yeah.
be left in the other country. No,
But
you take
yeah.
yourself with you everywhere you go. It doesn't matter
And
which.
it's a tiger by the tail, because what is supposed to help you eventually turns around and becomes the problem itself.
Yeah.
So, Charlotte, I'm conscious of time, but just to wrap up, if there was one thing that you want, I mean, we know there's no silver bullets and there's never just one thing, but if we were going to, what would be the catalyst to creating some of the change that we need to see in this space? Because I don't feel like we're necessarily going forwards. We're kind of going backwards in a different way.
Yeah, I think I would remove BMI and body weight as a pre-healthcare assessment marker, and I would focus more on metabolic fitness and other biomarkers of health, so that we start reducing stigma and discrimination and inequality in healthcare, but also across schools, and just the way that we talk about weight and about health, actually, what it means to be healthy. Because as long as we have this very weight-centric medical model, insurance model, that's just being perpetuated. And I think as long as there's this idea that I can only be healthy if I'm in a certain size body, we've got a real problem.
I mean, this conversation has been absolutely fascinating. So thank you so much, Charlotte, for
Thank you
your
for having me.
time.